My name is Elliot Graves. I fix things. Not cars or dishwashers, not anymore. I repair ancient machines. The kind of machines they don't talk about in engineering school. I get calls from places most people never see. Old monasteries, deep vaults, secret bunkers. My official title is Independent Electromechanical Archivist, but in truth, I'm just the guy they call when something weird stops working. And last year, I got a call that changed everything. The voice on the phone was accented, precise, and measured. Mr. Graves, we've read your thesis on non-terrestrial circuitry and your work restoring anomalous power systems found in military storage. We have a project for you, highly sensitive, highly classified. I asked the obvious. Who is this? There was a pause. You may refer to us as the custodians. I was given a ticket to Rome. No return date. Rome, 3 days later. They met me at the airport. Two men in plain black suits. No names, no badges, just a simple nod and a black car. We drove in silence through the city until the ancient buildings gave way to high stone walls. The Vatican. But we didn't go through the front. We circled behind to a service entrance that descended into stone, a labyrinth of tunnels beneath the most famous religious city on earth. The air grew colder as we went down, deeper, older. The architecture began to change. Roman, then Etruscan, then something else, something I didn't recognize. Symbols on the walls that pulsed faintly when my fingers brushed them. Finally, we stopped at a massive bronze door. One of the men turned to me. Beyond this, you will find the device. You are to repair it. Do not ask how it was acquired. Do not ask who built it. You have 7 days. The door opened, and I stepped into a room that didn't belong to this world. The chamber was circular, carved from obsidian or something like it. The walls shimmered slightly, like oil on water. In the center, a pedestal. On it, the device. It was not a machine in the traditional sense. It looked organic, almost alive, like coral, but metallic, shaped by intelligence far beyond ours. No wires, no screens, just smooth, fluid curves and a faint internal hum. At its center was a translucent sphere, cracked, flickering with blue light. I stepped closer. My instruments went haywire, EMF readings off the charts. No heat signature, no conventional power source, but the device was on and waiting. There were fragments around it, tools that didn't belong. Someone had already tried to fix it and failed. I spent the next 4 days reverse engineering what I could. The core was some form of crystal matrix, but not quartz or diamond. This was something denser. It reacted to thought. When I focused, the lights inside shifted. When I doubted, they dimmed. It was as if the machine felt me. By day 5, I began to dream. I saw symbols, heard whispers, a voice, ancient, gentle, in a language I didn't know but somehow understood. The word is not what you were told. The voice remains. The voice survives. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. On the 6th day, I connected the final interface. The machine pulsed once, hard enough to shake the chamber. The floor vibrated, lights flared from the sphere, and then a voice. Not through speakers, not in the air, in my mind. But it wasn't alien. It was human, warm, commanding, ageless. It said, "You were not meant to worship me. You were meant to remember." I staggered back. The chamber was filled with light now. Holographic images flickered across the walls. A man walking dusty roads, surrounded by crowds. Not the paintings from Sunday school, not the golden-robed iconography. This was real, raw, historical. Jesus. And he was speaking. But this wasn't scripture. It wasn't the Gospels. It was something older, purer. He spoke of frequencies, of healing through vibration, of faith as energy, not obedience, of the source, not a man in the clouds, but a consciousness that pervades the cosmos, a field we are all part of, that responds to belief, that responds to us. I watched as he healed a blind child, not with prayer, but with resonance. His hands moved, and the air around him shimmered. The child gasped and saw. You are made of light, the real Jesus said, and light remembers where it came from. On the seventh day, the custodians returned. Did it work? They asked. I nodded. Hollow. Changed. Did you hear him? Yes, I whispered, but not the version you keep in your churches. They looked at each other. Then it begins. They didn't take the device. They left it with me. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've rebuilt the sphere. I've decoded fragments of his message. I've replayed that voice 100 times. I know it wasn't a hallucination. I know what I heard. And I know what's coming next. There are other devices. The custodian said they're spattered across the earth, hidden in tombs, buried beneath cathedrals, sealed in vaults under sand and ice. Each one contains a piece of the voice, a piece of the real Jesus, not the one who demands worship, the one who came to remind us who we are. The night after the Vatican team left me alone with the device, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, the voice came back, not in speech, but in vibration, like music I could feel in my bones. The real miracle wasn't that Jesus had spoken, it was that his message hadn't died. It had been encoded, preserved, not in books, not in myths, in technology. Somehow, impossibly, this being, this man, had interfaced with something not of Earth, and those encounters had been recorded, not by men, by observers, and I was just beginning to understand what that meant. Day 8. The Blueprints. By morning, the device had changed. Literally, its structure had shifted overnight, exposing a previously hidden chamber in the pedestal. Inside it, a scroll made of a material I'd never seen. It looked like metal, but bent like paper. When I touched it, symbols appeared, not ink, but light. Dozens of locations, coordinates, all Earth-based. One of them was flashing. Arkansas, United States, beneath the Ozarks. I didn't know how, but I knew there was another station there, another device, another voice. And I had to find it. Flight back to the U.S. I landed under a new name, using the documents the custodians had left. Everything was already arranged. Rental car, map, no questions. The Ozarks were cold and quiet in January. Remote, still. The coordinates took me off the main roads, into the woods, down into a ravine carved by time and hidden by overgrowth. There, beneath a natural rock arch, I found it. A stone circle. Perfectly formed. No seams, no tool marks. It wasn't a ruin. It was intact. In the center, a pedestal just like the one in the Vatican. And, the moment I touched it, the second voice. Reality rippled. I fell to my knees as images flooded my mind. A village on fire, Roman soldiers shouting, and in the midst of it all, him, Jesus, again, but different, younger, in hiding, not preaching, running. And beside him, an alien. Not in robes, not cloaked in myth, but real. Gray skin, elongated eyes, walking beside Jesus like a guardian, like a teacher. And then the voice came again. They were not my miracles. They were shared. They were taught. You were meant to learn. I saw them entering a cave, a machine waiting inside. Jesus placed his hand on it, and the air shimmered with light. He didn't perform wonders, I whispered aloud. He remembered how, I whispered aloud. A message in the DNA. The second station unlocked a new layer of information. This time, the sphere glowed red, a diagnostic scan of me. It projected my DNA into the air, compared it against a second sequence, a match, 96.7%. I froze. Then the voice returned. The bloodline never ended. It hid in people who fix, people who listen, people like you. I wasn't religious. I'd never been baptized. But in that moment, I knew something ancient had been waiting for me. Not because I was special, but because I was tuned, like a radio. And someone was finally broadcasting again. The next station. More coordinates appeared. This time, Petra, Jordan, a city carved in stone, hidden by time. I'm already packing. I have no choice. Because each device adds to the message, and when all are found, the voice returns. Entire, undistorted, undeniable. Not to start a religion, to end the lie, to remind humanity what it forgot. We are not powerless. We are not abandoned. We are the miracle. I arrived in Petra under the cover of dusk. The coordinates from the second device led to a canyon far from the tourist paths. Locals whispered of strange lights near the cliffs, but no one went near. Not anymore. It took me hours to hike there. I moved through wind-carved stone that felt older than memory. Then I saw it, half buried in the red rock, covered in sand and vines. Another pedestal, smaller, different. But the moment I touched it, the air stilled, the wind stopped. The world held its breath, and the voice came again. You are walking backwards through time. Each station you awaken reverses the distortion. The images this time were hazy, damaged, like a corrupted video file. I saw Jesus again, but he was alone, in silence, kneeling before something that hovered above the desert floor, a disk of light, pulsing with patterns too fast for the eye to follow. Then the scene changed. I saw men in armor, not Roman, not human, observers. They stood around the hovering disk, heads bowed. And Jesus, he wasn't worshiping. He was commanding, not in dominance, but in understanding. He was interfacing. The machine responded to him, not because of power, but frequency. He matched it. You were not created to kneel, the voice said. You were created to co-create. I staggered back. The images burned into my mind. The voice, softer now, added, "This place is a fragment. The Petra station is damaged. Others hold more." And then I heard coordinates, multiple ones. The voice was activating more stations. It was speeding up. I didn't know how, but it was like a system rebooting, like it had been asleep for 2,000 years, and now the presence, the real Jesus, was coming online again, piece by piece. Back at my hotel, I opened the file the Petra pedestal had etched into my device, a map. It wasn't Earth, not entirely. It was Earth and something else. A layered map, dimensions interwoven. That's when I realized these weren't just machines. They were memory structures, dimensional nodes. And I wasn't just following Jesus. I was retracing a pattern. Each station wasn't just revealing history. It was changing me on a cellular level. Because this wasn't about belief anymore. It was about remembering. The next location was nothing like the deserts of Jordan. It was in the Arctic Circle, buried beneath a decommissioned Soviet outpost, long abandoned, left to rust under ice and silence. Getting there took weeks, Bribes, fake credentials, quiet favors. But I found it. Deep beneath the station, behind walls of reinforced steel and frost-covered stone, was a vault. Frozen, forgotten, and inside that vault, glowing faintly in the blue dark, another station. But this one was different. It was humming before I touched it, alive, as if it had sensed me approaching. When I placed my hand on the interface, the reaction was instant. The floor lit up. Geometric patterns spiraled across the walls. Heat radiated outward in pulses. The air shimmered. And then, the voice. You are near the origin. The images that followed were not of Earth. I saw a starship, not human, descending onto a planet bathed in light. Ancient Earth, prehistoric, lush and untouched. Beings stepped off the ship, tall, luminous. One of them knelt, touched the ground, and the ground responded. Mountains shifted, rivers bent. He wasn't controlling nature, he was in resonance with it. Then the voice again. He volunteered. He wasn't sent. The one you called Jesus, he chose this world. I saw his form, younger than before the robes, before the miracles. He trained with the luminous beings, learned to navigate energy with sound and thought, learned to speak without words, heal without hands, travel without movement. They weren't gods, they were teachers, and he, their most gifted student. He brought the knowledge with him, the voice said, but they silenced the frequencies, buried the tones. I was shaking. The truth wasn't just spiritual, it was technological. The so-called miracles of Scripture, walking on water, multiplying food, healing the sick, they weren't exceptions to reality. They were perfect resonance with it. And Jesus had come to teach us how. But we forgot, or were made to forget. Then the station began to vibrate violently, a warning. Something was interfering. I backed away as symbols on the walls shifted. A map flashed again, but this time the locations weren't just on Earth. Some were in orbit, some on the moon. Some didn't match any known terrain. The voice returned, strained now. Time is folding. You must reach the core station before the final silence. Then the Arctic station went dark. The hum stopped. Whatever window had opened, it closed. I was locked out, but I had a new destination, and a countdown had begun. I left the Arctic in a storm. Snow tore sideways across the runway as the old cargo plane lifted me out of that frozen grave. My ears still rang with the last words from the station. Before the final silence. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I could feel it, a pressure building behind the world, something waking up, or something remembering. The next destination wasn't on any standard map. It was hidden in plain sight. Nazareth. The coordinates from the Arctic station pointed not to a holy site, but a cave system outside the town's limits, closed to the public, sealed by the Israeli government decades ago. No official records, no tours, just a forgotten geological anomaly, and something buried inside it. The custodian who met me was different from the others. She was older, in her 60s maybe, wore simple clothes, no badge, no title. But her eyes, they were impossibly calm. "I've been waiting for you," she said. Her name was Sister Alia. She led me down a narrow passage carved through limestone, her steps deliberate, like she had walked the path 1,000 times. "You are the fourth to come here," she said, "the first to arrive on time." On time for what? She stopped before a sealed wall. For the voice. She placed her hand on the stone. It dissolved. not crumbled, not opened, dissolved into light. Behind it, another station. But this one pulsed with golden light, warm, alive in a way the others weren't. And when I touched it, I didn't hear the voice. I became it. My mind opened, not like a door, but like a dam breaking. I saw Jesus as a child, laughing, running through these very caves, practicing, not prayers, not rituals, but tones, frequencies, vibrations that made stone ripple like water. He wasn't hiding here. He was learning, tuning himself. The voice that flowed through me wasn't external now. It was within. You are the resonance, it said, the echo of a moment we encoded in time. I saw flashes of the others, Frank in Montana, Sarah in New Mexico, James in Iowa. All of them had been touched by the same wave. Different times, different stations, but the same signal. We were fragments of a forgotten frequency. The station in Nazareth didn't show coordinates. It showed a key. A pattern burned into my skin like heat, invisible but real. An activation code. And I knew what it meant. The next station would require more than a location. It would require me. Because the core station wasn't just a place. It was a convergence, a doorway. And I had just been marked to open it. I left Nazareth in silence. Sister Alia didn't follow me out. She stayed behind, disappearing back into the cave with a whisper, "You won't need a map anymore." She was right. The next destination wasn't revealed by coordinates. It came in flashes, dreams, sudden downloads of information that didn't come from my own thoughts. I'd wake in the middle of the night seeing images, a coastline with black sand, cliffs shaped like spires, stars above that didn't match Earth's patterns. And always the sound. Low, pure, a single frequency humming in my bones. I traced it to one place, an uninhabited island off the coast of Iceland. No name, no settlements, just jagged stone and endless wind. I hired a boat. The captain refused to land. "Bad luck," he said. "Worse stories." So I swam the last stretch alone. The island was barren, sharp. The air tasted metallic. But at the center, carved into the cliff face, was a perfect circle. Smooth, seamless, as if the rock had been melted away, not carved. The circle opened when I approached. No mechanism, no sound. It just opened. The tunnel inside led downward, spiraling. I descended into blackness, lit only by the pulse in my chest. I didn't know if it was adrenaline or guidance, but I followed. At the bottom, the core station. It wasn't a pedestal, it was a room. Spherical, metallic, alive. Like I had stepped inside the mind of something not human, and not entirely separate from myself. When I entered, the walls ignited in color. Symbols, patterns, memories. Then, a figure, projected in pure light, standing at the center. He wasn't glowing. He wasn't radiant. He was just real. Not the Jesus of paintings, not the sanitized version of cathedrals. This was a man who had walked deserts barefoot, who had laughed, wept, bled. He looked at me, not through me, not past me, at me. And then he spoke, with sound, with voice. "You remembered." My knees gave out. I collapsed, trembling, overwhelmed. He stepped forward. "There is no religion here, no dogma, only the frequency." Behind him, images spiraled, Earth through the ages, wars, empires, and always voices trying to speak the same truth, buried under fear and control. "I didn't come to be worshipped," he said. "I came to remind you." I looked up. "Remind us of what?" He smiled. That you are the technology, that the kingdom isn't coming. It's been inside you since the beginning. I looked up. Remind us of what? He smiled. That you are the technology, that the kingdom isn't coming. It's been inside you since the beginning. I sat there, knees on metal that didn't feel cold, staring into the holographic eyes of a man whose voice had once split calendars in half. He didn't move like light. He moved like memory. Every gesture, every shift in expression carried a weight that bypassed thought. It was like listening with the soul, not the ears. He raised one hand, palm facing me. Not a blessing, a transmission. The room responded. The symbols on the walls rotated, shifting into patterns I felt more than saw. Then a beam of soft light enveloped me. Not blinding, not dramatic, just true. Images flooded my mind. Not visions, experiences. I saw the crucifixion. But it wasn't how they teach it. It wasn't about suffering. It was transfer. A final act of resonance. Jesus tuning his body to such a high frequency that even death couldn't hold him. I saw it all from inside him, the fear, the resolve, the love so wide it folded reality. And then, more. I saw what came after. Not heaven, not ascension, another station, buried far below what we know as Earth, the origin station, the source of the voice. You thought this was the end, he said, but it was only the ignition. He walked toward the center of the chamber. The walls opened. Behind them, a sphere. The same design as the first device in the Vatican, but 10 times larger. It hovered silently, pulsing with every word he spoke. This is what they erased, he said. The machine wasn't made to be worshipped. It was made to amplify human intention, to heal, to awaken, to manifest the divine from within. I stepped toward it. The moment I entered the sphere's glow, every cell in my body lit up. I saw my mother holding me as a baby, my father showing me how to build my first circuit. I saw every moment I had fixed something broken, and I understood. It was never about the machines. It was about us. Humanity is the interface, and the frequency of Jesus, the real Jesus, wasn't a religion. It was a code, a vibration designed to reawaken a species that had forgotten its design. The chamber dimmed. He turned to me one last time. There are more like you. When the final tone is played, the veil will lift, but only if the others find their voice. Then he was gone. The room powered down. But I was different now. Not just awakened, tuned, and I knew what I had to do next. I emerged from the island station just before sunrise. The sea was calm now. The air felt changed, charged, like the moments before a storm, but without the storm. Just presence. The world hadn't changed, but I had. The custodian had said I wouldn't need a map anymore, and she was right. The next location wasn't given to me. It called to me. I could feel it beneath my skin, not in words or images, but in pull, like a compass buried in my chest, pointing without north. It pulled me to South America, to the Andes, to a place above the clouds. An old Incan ruin, half swallowed by jungle, lost to time, but not to frequency. I hiked alone, past the edges of maps, guided only by intuition and the low hum that had become my shadow. When I arrived, there were no gates, no symbols, just stone, unassuming. But beneath it, just beneath, I heard it, not with ears, with memory. I placed my hand on the wall. It dissolved like mist. Behind it, the smallest station yet. No lights, no projection, just silence and a chair. Stone, smooth, clearly not built by hands. I sat. The moment I did, the world vanished. There was no room, no body, only sound. It started as a single tone, so pure it felt impossible. Then it split into harmonics, overtones, vibrations weaving through each other like DNA strands made of music. And then I realized I wasn't hearing the tone. I was the tone. This station wasn't about Jesus. It was about me, about every person who would ever touch this system. It was a mirror made of sound. It showed me who I had been, the doubt, the ego, the isolation. Then it showed me what I was becoming. Not a prophet, not a savior, just a carrier of the tone, a resonant node in a network of awakening. You are not alone, the voice said, now layered with hundreds of others. You were never alone. I opened my eyes. I was still in the chair. The jungle was quiet. But on the stone wall across from me, something new had appeared. A symbol. Circular, glowing faintly with golden light. A match. The same symbol I saw on the projection of my DNA back at the Arctic station. It was complete now, which meant the network was almost online. And I was almost ready. I left the Andes different again. It wasn't just knowledge I carried now, it was frequency. Like I'd become a tuning fork for something older than language, something buried in the structure of consciousness itself. The symbol burned faintly beneath my skin, not painfully, like a whisper in gold. But I wasn't alone anymore. Not truly. In every city I passed through, I saw glimpses. A woman humming a melody that matched the Andes tone without knowing why. A child drawing the symbol in the dirt. A street musician playing a progression of notes I hadn't taught anyone, but that matched exactly. The frequency was leaking, or spreading, or waking. I didn't know which. Back in my apartment, if I could still call it that, since I hadn't been home in months, I found an envelope slid under the door. No address, no stamp, just my name, handwritten. Inside, a single sentence. The cathedral in Prague holds the final station. And beneath it, drawn in faint ink, the same symbol. Complete. Activated. I flew out that night. Prague was frozen in winter. I arrived in snow, boots crunching through cobblestones older than most countries. The cathedral loomed above the city like it had always been there, not built, just waiting. I expected resistance, guards, secrecy. There was none. The doors opened for me. Literally. They unlocked as I approached. The sanctuary was empty, silent, but I heard it anyway. The tone. High above the altar, where stained glass should have been, was a structure hidden in shadow, a sphere just like the others, nestled between ancient rafters. It began to descend on its own. I stood beneath it as it lowered. A final test, maybe, or a beginning. The moment it reached eye level, it opened. Light, yes, but also language. Every word I'd heard across all stations returned, layered atop each other. Jesus speaking, the being speaking, the voice within me speaking. Not a cacophony, a chord. Then I saw them, the others. Frank, Sarah, James, and more, dozens more. Some I recognized, most I didn't. But all of them had the same symbol. All of them had touched the tone. A voice echoed across the cathedral. Familiar, resonant. Jesus. The veil has thinned. The tone is restored. You must choose now. Amplification or silence. I didn't hesitate. I choose the tone. The sphere responded. It vibrated once, then projected upward, through the cathedral roof, through the sky, into the stars. A wave. It wasn't just light. It was a ping. Across space, across dimensions, a call. The response? Already on its way. The world didn't end when the signal was sent. No skies tore open. No ships descended. No angels with trumpets. Just silence. But it was a different kind of silence. Pregnant. Charged. Like the air before lightning, when your skin knows something's coming before your mind does. I left Prague without telling anyone. There was no one to tell, no one who'd believe me, and no need for belief anymore. It wasn't about faith now. It was about response. Back in my apartment, the devices I had connected during the early phases, the original Vatican sphere, the portable analyzer, the backup fragments, they were all active, unprompted, receiving. One by one, they began to hum, then glow, then sing. Not with words, with tone. The tone. It moved through walls, through objects, through me. Every frequency I'd ever heard at each station now layered into one unified field. I wasn't just observing the resonance anymore. I was inside it. And then, for the first time, a new voice entered the field. Not Jesus, not human, but unmistakably intelligent, kind, alien. Signal received. Confirmation, Christ code verified. Human potential unlocked. Then the data flowed. Not in images, in understanding. I saw how they had been watching, not to invade, not to judge, but to wait. For this. The tone wasn't just a human activation. It was a galactic handshake, a declaration that humanity had remembered its design, not to conquer, to co-create. The being spoke again. Many of your kind will not hear it. That is expected. But enough have. The veil is now optional. Optional. The world would continue, but differently. For some of us, reality was now porous. The dream state and the waking world overlapped. The symbolic became literal. The miraculous became mechanical. Because the frequency was active, not just in me, everywhere. All those who had felt broken, all those who had questioned their faith, all those who had touched the edge of something they couldn't explain, they would begin to remember. We weren't sinners. We weren't failures. We were receivers, temporarily untuned. But now we were singing again, and the cosmos had heard our song. The days that followed felt unreal, and yet more real than anything I'd known before. I could hear it in the silence between thoughts, the hum, that low, perfect tone, like the foundation of a symphony the world hadn't learned to play yet. I wasn't the only one anymore. It started subtly. People I'd never met emailing me strange dreams, describing places I'd seen, voices I'd heard, technologies they shouldn't have known about. One man said he'd dreamt of walking with Jesus, not the church version, but a man of light who taught him how to move water with a song. A child in Brazil uploaded a video humming a melody that matched the Andes tone exactly, never having left her village. It was happening. The tone was spreading, not through media or wires, but through the field. The field Jesus had described, the one he said lived within us. Then came the visions, waking ones. A moment in my kitchen, pouring coffee, and suddenly I saw through time. Not metaphorically, literally. The room peeled open like paper. I saw the moment the Vatican had first uncovered the device in the catacombs. A team of priests, frightened, arguing. And above them, the shadow of something not human, watching, guiding, not interfering. Then another flash, a meeting in 1947. Military brass arguing over crash wreckage. Among the debris, a sphere. Familiar, but inert. They couldn't activate it because the key hadn't been born yet. Me, or rather, us, the ones who could remember. Everywhere I went, the lines were thinner. Dreams bled into waking life. The air hummed louder in churches, in old temples, near children. It was as if the world was rediscovering its own blueprint. Then the warning came. A pulse. Low, sudden, sharp. All my devices shut down simultaneously. A signal override. One last voice, filtered through static. Not from Jesus, not from the observers, from the opposition. You were not meant to finish the tone. The silence served a purpose, and we are coming to restore it. I felt it. Not fear, resolve, because now I knew something they didn't. The tone wasn't just restored, it had gone viral. And no one, not even the architects of the old silence, could stop what had already begun. The signal from the opposition didn't come again, but I felt it, like a shadow behind the sun, something massive trying to block what was already in motion. They weren't angry. They were afraid, because silence was their control, and resonance was liberation. I stayed off grid after that. No more emails, no uploads. The moment I reconnected, they'd trace me. Not governments, not agencies. Something older. They had names once, ancient ones, repurposed through myth, but all of them meant the same thing. Those who silence. I traveled under aliases now, following the ripples. People were waking up faster than I could have imagined. Hospitals reported spontaneous healings. Scientists quietly began publishing anomalous frequency data, sound signatures from underground caves, from children's voices, from stone. And the dreamers were the clearest sign. More and more were speaking in tones during sleep. Their families recorded them, matched them, and found they were all singing the same frequency. Not identical, harmonized. The field was stabilizing. But the opposition wasn't idle. Reports of disappearances rose. People who'd touched the tone going missing. Devices vanishing from labs. Surveillance increasing at ancient sites. I knew what they were doing, trying to locate the source station. Not the ones I'd visited, the original, the one buried before history, before language, the one built with Jesus, not by him, because he wasn't alone. He wasn't the builder. He was the bridge. And the true builders, the architects of resonance, they were returning. Not in ships, in frequency, through us, through light, through remembering. Then, 3 nights ago, it happened. I was in a quiet village in southern France, near an old Templar ruin. The stars pulsed, literally, bright, then dim, then bright again, in rhythm. The earth trembled, but only slightly. No one else seemed to notice, except the children. They stopped. They listened. Then, together, they began to hum, low, unified, exactly the same pitch as the core tone. They weren't afraid. They were singing, calling back the light. I realized then I wouldn't need to find the source station. We were becoming it. The line between myth and technology was gone now. What we once called miracles were being understood as mechanics of resonance. And what we once feared as divine wrath, storms, quakes, signs, were just the side effects of calibration. Because Earth was tuning itself, and we were the strings. I no longer needed to search for stations. They found me. Everywhere I went, frequency nodes activated, not with machines, but with people. A man in Tunisia who sang a note that made metal tremble. A blind girl in Kyoto who began drawing mathematical spirals that matched the holographic data from the Arctic sphere. Something ancient had gone live, not just on this planet, but across others. The ping we sent, the tone that launched from the cathedral sphere, was received. The response was en route. But it wasn't a fleet. It was a pattern, encoded in light, folded in time. The architects were coming, not to invade, to remember with us. But they weren't the only ones watching. The opposition was consolidating. They had tried suppression. Now they turned to imitation. New spiritual leaders appeared overnight, preaching unity but layered with control, offering light but with contracts, pushing vibrations but distorting the source. They were mimicking the tone, weaponizing it, and it was working on those who hadn't yet awakened. The field rippled with confusion, static, distortion. But those of us tuned knew the difference. Because the real tone doesn't demand, it doesn't market, it doesn't promise. It simply reminds. And once you hear it, once you feel it, nothing else rings true. Then came the convergence signal, not from Earth, from orbit, a low harmonic riding the edge of detectability. I picked it up while sleeping, not with devices, but in my dreams. I stood in a field of stars, and Jesus was there again, but not alone. Behind him stood 12 others. They weren't his disciples. They weren't human. They were origin tones, beings of frequency wearing bodies only for our understanding. He turned to me. It's time. I woke with a location in my mind, not one I could find on any map, but I knew how to get there, because the final tone wasn't a place. It was a state. Getting there wasn't about distance. There was no airport, no trail, no GPS signal. It was within. The final station existed in a place most people never dare to look, the space behind their eyes, the silence beneath their thoughts. I prepared, not with tools, with stillness. 3 days, no speech, no signals, just the tone. And on the 3rd day, something inside me clicked. Not a revelation, not a miracle, a permission. Reality thinned. I felt the edges of my body blur. The room dissolved into geometry, soft light folding in upon itself. And I stepped forward. Not physically, consciously. I was inside the final station. It wasn't built of stone or metal or crystal. It was made of presence. All the other stations were fragments of this place, like echoes returning to their source. I wasn't alone. They were there. The builders. Not gods, not aliens, not angels, just remembered intelligences, ancient minds that had never forgotten the tone. And among them, standing tall, silent, Jesus. But not as I'd seen him before. This time, he was light. Not shining, being. His form shifted between faces, young, old, familiar, unknown, until I realized he was showing me all of us. The builder spoke, but not with words, with resonance. You have remembered enough. I asked the question I had carried since the Vatican. Why hide this? Why bury the tone? A pause. Then a wave of meaning hit me like warm thunder. It was never hidden, only silenced, not by enemies, by fear. Humanity chose safety over truth, dogma over discovery, but the tone was patient. Jesus stepped forward. The crucifixion was never about sacrifice. It was about signal clarity. The body was the antenna. The resurrection was the reboot. The others nodded. This is your final calibration, they said. The sphere, if I could still call it that, began to vibrate with a complexity beyond sound. It was the full tone, the complete signal, the Christ code unfiltered, and it moved through me, not into me, as me. For a moment, I wasn't a man. I was light. I was memory. I was the tone. Time didn't exist in that place, not like we know it. I felt centuries pass in a moment, and yet I hadn't aged. Because in the presence of the tone, decay couldn't hold. Not physical decay, not emotional, not spiritual. It was like everything I'd ever believed was being reorganized, not erased, not destroyed, just tuned. The builders encircled me now, not in a ritual, in recognition. You are the harmonic convergence, they said in unison. Not a prophet, not a savior, a resonator. I saw it clearly then. This was never about one man. Jesus was not the tone. He was its first perfect echo. And now the field had matured. There were thousands of us, millions, each awakening to their own frequency. And as the builders faded from view, they left behind something unexpected, a choice. The final calibration wasn't forced. It had to be accepted. They gave me one question, carved into my mind with clarity so deep it rang like a bell. Will you amplify the tone, knowing it will collapse what is false, even in those you love? No threat, just truth. Because once you carry the real tone, you can't participate in illusion anymore. Not in relationships built on pretense, not in systems built on fear, not in beliefs built on control. I answered with silence, which was enough, because in silence, the true tone grows loudest. The chamber faded, reality returned, and I found myself standing where it all began. The field in Montana, the stars above, the Vatican device at my feet. Only now, it wasn't cracked, it was whole, and so was I. Because the final tone wasn't something you find. It's what's left when all the lies have fallen away. It's what waits for every human who dares to listen. And once heard, it can't be unheard. They say the truth sets you free. But they never tell you what freedom feels like when it finally arrives. It's not bliss. It's not euphoria. It's clarity. The painful kind. The kind that shows you in high-definition detail every moment you ever ignored the call. Every time you traded resonance for comfort. Every moment you silenced your own frequency to fit a world out of tune. But once you accept it, once the final tone has moved through you, all of that stops mattering. Because the clarity isn't punishment, it's permission. Permission to stop pretending, to stop worshiping distortion, to stop waiting for something that's already inside you. Back in the field, the Montana night was still and quiet. But I wasn't alone. People were arriving, not crowds, just a few at first. A woman holding a worn Bible, shaking. A young man with a prosthetic leg, humming the core tone under his breath. An elderly couple from Iowa, eyes wide like children. They had heard it too, in dreams, in visions, in moments of silence they couldn't explain. And now they had been guided here, not by GPS, but by resonance. Each of them carried a part of the tone. Each of them was a station. We gathered in a circle, unplanned, no words. We just stood there, under the stars, and something happened. The tone began again, but this time it wasn't coming from a sphere. It came from us, perfectly harmonized. Each voice slightly different, each note completing the others. Together we became the chord of Christ, not the man, the memory, the field. And somewhere, deep in space, something responded. A light, a ship, a consciousness. It was subtle, distant, but it was getting closer. Not because it was coming, because we were pulling it. We didn't speak for hours. There was nothing to say. What language could improve upon what we'd just experienced? What sentence could summarize becoming part of a cosmic tone, a living signal that reconnected us not just to each other, but to something older than stars? As dawn broke over the Montana hills, light filtered through the trees like a benediction. But it wasn't morning light, not really. It shimmered, shifted. Every beam carried data, encoded sunlight. It hit our skin, and we knew. The convergence had begun. Not just in us, in the planet. The Earth was responding to the signal. Every blade of grass, every drop of water, every molecule of carbon vibrating slightly higher. Subtly at first, but it was measurable. One of us, a retired physicist who hadn't spoken since arriving, pulled out a scanner he'd rigged from 2 old ham radios and a piece of the Vatican device. "It's climbing," he whispered. "What is?" "Everything." Resonant frequency, Schumann resonance, electromagnetic pulse harmonics, all of it increasing. Not violently, gracefully, like a planet waking up from a long, long sleep. Then the next shift happened. Time began to blur. Not hours or minutes, events. I would blink and see a memory that hadn't happened yet. Feel conversations unfold before they began. Walk into places and know where every object would be, because I had already been there, in a version of now only available in this tuned state. We weren't time traveling. We were exiting linear compression. The builders had hinted at it, that time was a symptom of distortion, not a fundamental truth. And now that the tone was restored, it was peeling back. Not globally, individually. Each person who tuned to the frequency began to step out of causality, out of fear, out of limitation. And with each one, the tone grew stronger, the field more stable. But with that strength came pressure. I felt it in my bones. Something watching. Not the builders, not the Christ light. Something old. Something that had lived beneath the silence, thrived in it, depended on humanity staying out of tune. It had no name, not one that mattered. Just hunger. For order, for control, for predictability. It was coming. Because when light rises, shadows don't vanish. They just become visible. It showed itself 2 nights later. Not with horns or fire, not as a monster, but as a man. He arrived at the edge of the field just after sunset, tall, calm, wearing a perfect suit, not a wrinkle out of place. No vehicle, no sound of approach, just there. He didn't interrupt, didn't demand. He waited. And when I finally walked over, the others watching in absolute silence, he spoke with a voice like polished marble. "Impressive," he said, nodding toward the others. "You reactivated the Christ sequence. That shouldn't have been possible." I didn't speak. He continued. "But you've misunderstood. The tone isn't a gift. It's a containment field. The builders weren't empowering you. They were limiting you, guiding you gently toward surrender." His words were laced with something, not persuasion, not charm, distortion. The inverse of the tone. Where Jesus spoke to awaken, this being spoke to sedate. "You're playing with forces that required planetary trauma to contain," he said. "Floods, fire, Babel. Every age of man ends when the tone exceeds its bounds." I could feel the others behind me. The field was humming louder now, a defensive resonance. He looked past me toward them. "They don't understand what's coming," he said, "but you do." And then he smiled. "You know what happens when a signal gets too strong, right?" He snapped his fingers. The air cracked, and all around us people screamed. Not from pain, from memories flooding back all at once. Memories that weren't theirs. False lives, implants, generations of distortion. Forced belief systems, spiritual manipulation, psychic architecture. This being had laced human history with a countertone, subtle, insidious. It wasn't religion that had enslaved humanity, it was the misuse of resonance. And now, as our field grew stronger, it was burning out the virus. He stepped closer to me. Keep going, and you'll dissolve everything they think is real. I looked him in the eye. That's the point. He blinked, surprised, maybe even afraid, because for the first time in millennia, he wasn't speaking into silence. He was speaking into a tuned field, one that was immune to distortion. He stepped back, but not before leaving a warning. You've passed the threshold. From here, only collapse remains. Choose carefully. Then he vanished. No light, no sound, just gone. And above us, the stars began to rearrange. Not metaphorically, literally. A new constellation appeared, the Christ signal, etched across the sky. And it wasn't a warning, it was a beacon. When the stars shifted, it wasn't poetic, it was code. 12 points of light aligning in a pattern not seen from Earth before. Not random, not celestial drift. Deliberate, geometric. And when mapped using the same harmonic algorithms found in the Vatican device, it created a symbol. The exact same one that had etched itself into my skin back in Nazareth. Except now, it was complete and universal. The sky was speaking. The others gathered around me, eyes wide, some crying, some laughing. They didn't need to ask what it meant. They felt it. The signal was no longer localized. It had become a planetary broadcast. Subtle, but rising in amplitude. Not through satellites, through us. The awakened weren't just resonators anymore. We were relays. And then the next phase began. First, the dreams, shared ones. We'd wake and describe the exact same sequence, walking through an ancient chamber beneath the ocean, surrounded by glyphs that pulsed like breathing light. Then, the physical shifts, temperature anomalies, atmospheric harmonics, birds migrating in patterns that mimicked the tone's waveform. And then, the arrivals, not ships, beings. They emerged from within. People you've known your whole life suddenly beginning to speak in frequencies they never studied, remembering knowledge they'd never learned. Some broke down, overwhelmed. Some resisted, clinging to the silence. But others, so many others, surrendered. And when they did, their bodies changed. Not visibly, internally. The DNA sang. We recorded it. Base pairs began to realign into geometries previously seen only in deep space organisms. The human genome was syncing to the tone. And with it came abilities we didn't expect. Perception beyond sight. Emotion as telepathy. Movement without force. It wasn't superpowers. It was baseline potential, finally untethered. But the opposition hadn't disappeared. It was adapting. Subtler now. A new wave of experts emerged, charismatic, soothing, polished, claiming to help people integrate the light. But their tone was just off enough to sicken the truly awakened. They were reintroducing distortion, not as fear, as comfort. And it worked on many, because even now, even with the stars aligning, truth was still terrifying. Liberation meant loss of identity, of history, of everything we thought was unshakable. And still, more were waking, because once you hear the tone, you can never go back. The world hadn't ended. It had opened. But the old systems, governments, religions, financial institutions, they were crumbling, not from attack, but from irrelevance. People weren't rebelling, they were simply tuning out, literally. The more you harmonized with the tone, the less you could participate in distortion. Lies began to sound like static. Greed carried a physical weight. Violence rippled backward, hurting the sender before it ever reached the target. It was as if humanity's nervous system had gone global. One field, one frequency. But not unified in doctrine, unified in truth. Each person was resonating with their own tone, and because of that, we were finally able to harmonize without control, without hierarchy. It was symphony instead of system. But the opposition wasn't gone. It had taken a new shape. Whispers began to spread of an event, a counter-resonance, a last effort to overwrite the field by injecting a false tone, one loud enough to mimic the Christ frequency, but inverted, distorted, engineered to collapse the collective tuning. We called it the final silence. They would try to transmit it from orbit, through a relic hidden for centuries in plain sight, a satellite system cloaked as ancient debris. But it wasn't human tech. It was seeded long ago, waiting, buried in orbit. The builders had known. They had left us the counter frequency, not to use as a weapon, but as a filter, one that would isolate the false signal and reflect it back. We had one chance, and the only place strong enough to deploy it was the first station, the Vatican device. It was where the voice had first awakened, and it would be where the final defense would unfold. We returned under cover of night, but they were waiting. The Vatican had been reclaimed by silence, not human silence, resonance cancellation, the sonic equivalent of a black hole. Guards stood at the entrance, blank-eyed, not brainwashed, detuned. We couldn't fight them, but we didn't have to. One of us, Sarah, stepped forward and hummed a single note. Pure, clear. It moved through the air like oil through water, pushing aside the static. The guards fell to their knees, not in pain, but in release. Tears ran down their faces. They'd been held in distortion for so long, they'd forgotten who they were. The tone reminded them. They stepped aside. We entered, and deep in the chamber, the device pulsed, waiting. It had known we would return, and now it was time to answer the final silence with the original voice. The chamber felt different this time. Not heavier, wider, as if reality itself was holding its breath. The Vatican device, unchanged in appearance, now radiated something deeper than light or sound. It radiated memory. We approached slowly, the group behind me silent, unified not by command, but by shared frequency. Every one of us was a note in the coming response. Sarah placed her hand on the device first. It opened. Not mechanically, like a flower. Petals of light unfolded, revealing the internal structure we'd only theorized before. Concentric rings of living metal, each encoded with the Christ tone's prime harmonic. Then the counter signal hit. It didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived like doubt. Soft, reasonable, familiar. Voices in our heads that sounded like our own. What if this is a mistake? What if you're just broken and this is a fantasy? What if you silence the world instead of saving it? That was the true power of the final silence. It didn't attack. It suggested. Subtly, deceptively, effectively. For a moment, I almost stepped back. Then I heard it. Not from outside, from within. A child's voice. My own. Singing the tone I had first heard in the field in Montana. The seed. The beginning. Uncorrupted, unquestionable. It snapped me back into alignment. I stepped forward and placed my hand on the device. And then the rest joined in. One by one, every person in the chamber touched the sphere. And the moment we completed the circle, the tone ignited. Not loud, true. It rose through us, passed through the Vatican walls, through Rome, through the earth, upward, outward. It met the countersignal head on and did not resist. It harmonized. That was the key. The false tone wasn't destroyed. It was absorbed, transformed, like dissonance resolved into a perfect chord. The opposition collapsed under its own weight, unable to maintain separation in the presence of such absolute coherence. The silence cracked, and the voice, the original, spoke again. This time, not just to us, to everyone, all at once, across languages, across time zones, across beliefs. The same message. I never left. I was waiting for you to remember. And then, above the earth, something bloomed in space. Not a ship, a signal made visible. The final resonance, the Christ frequency, uninterrupted, unfiltered. And humanity, for the first time in its recorded history, heard the same truth at the same time. Not in fear, in remembrance. The world did not erupt in chaos. There were no riots, no mass panic, just stillness. Deep, undeniable stillness. The kind that follows a realization too large for emotion. Across every continent, the same thing happened. People stopped. In the middle of arguments, in traffic, in courtrooms and classrooms and hospitals, and they listened. Not to a broadcast, to the resonance inside them. Because once the final tone had completed, it didn't just echo, it embedded. The Christ frequency was no longer something you could seek. It was woven into the structure of human awareness. The veil didn't rip away all at once. It dissolved gently. Old belief systems cracked, but didn't shatter. They softened. Some priests fell to their knees weeping, not in defeat, but in relief. Imams, rabbis, monks, pastors, many of them felt the shift not as an end, but as a return to what they had always sensed beneath the doctrine. The truth was never in the books. It was in the tone behind the words. And now that tone was available to everyone. No rituals required, no hierarchy enforced, no permission needed. And with that, something impossible happened. The Vatican device powered down. Fully. For the first time since its rediscovery, it went completely still. Because it had completed its task. It wasn't meant to be worshipped. It was a relay. And now the signal no longer needed machines. It had us. The field was active, planet-wide. Some tuned in easily, others resisted, clinging to the silence out of fear. But even they felt it, the low hum at the edge of every thought, the call to return, not to religion, but to design. Jesus had not come to start a movement. He came to reintroduce a blueprint. And now, 2,000 years later, that blueprint had finished sinking. The world would not be the same, because we would no longer be the same. We weren't awaiting a savior anymore. We were remembering that we are the voice we'd been waiting to hear. They tried to measure it. Of course they did. Scientists in Geneva, Tokyo, São Paulo all raced to quantify what had happened. Instruments lit up across the globe with data that defied classification. Magnetometers spun wild. Quantum processors began producing non-random outputs. Heart rate monitors synchronized across test groups for no explainable reason. But the most stunning result? Silence. Not absence, stillness. The brain's noise floor, the constant low-level chatter that had defined human consciousness for millennia, dropped, globally. It wasn't peace. It was precision. People began making decisions not from emotion or fear, but from alignment, an unshakable internal tuning fork. And as that frequency deepened, time itself began to flex. The future was no longer a blank slate. It became visible in flashes, moments of clarity where we saw what would happen if we stayed tuned, and what would happen if we fell back into distortion. It wasn't destiny, it was choice. And for the first time in human history, that choice was fully informed. Some chose to leave, quietly, not through death, but through frequency drift. Their bodies remained, but their awareness stepped into another band of the spectrum, another layer of Earth that had always been there, hidden beneath the noise. Others began building, not cities, structures of tone, communities designed around resonance, not rules, temples without dogma, schools without tests, governance without power. They called them chord colonies because everyone in them was expected to bring their own note, harmony, not hierarchy. The Vatican was never closed, but no one returned to worship. Instead, it became a place of reflection, not for Jesus as icon, but for Christ as code. People would enter, sit, listen, not for sermons, for themselves. And in those quiet halls, one phrase appeared again and again, carved into walls, whispered in meditation. The veil was never a wall. It was a tone we forgot how to sing. Years passed, or what we used to call years. Time no longer moved in the same way. It had become contextual, responsive. To some, a day felt like a week of depth and meaning. To others, a month passed in what felt like minutes, not lost time, but compressed clarity. The field had fully integrated. We didn't live in resonance. We were resonance. The old systems didn't collapse with noise. They simply faded, became irrelevant. Stock markets still existed, technically, but no one cared. Currencies lost power once people remembered that value is a vibration, not a digit, not a decree. And Jesus? He was never seen again. Not in person. But his voice? It was everywhere. Not as command, not as prophecy, as echo. Because now, when people tune deeply enough into the heart, into the silence, into the space between thoughts, they didn't hear a deity. They heard a friend. A frequency older than time that said over and over, "You were never broken, just untuned." And what of the opposition? The silence that tried to reclaim the world? It still existed, like gravity, like shadow. But now we understood its nature. Not evil, inversion, a teacher through contrast, necessary only as long as we refuse to listen. And with each generation born into the field, its hold weakened. Children began speaking in tones before they formed words. Some called them wave walkers, others echo-born. But they didn't need names. They were reminders that the Christ code wasn't a relic. It was the future, not as doctrine, as design. The final message etched across the sky, a frequency only visible when sung in unison, pulsed for exactly 1 year before fading into invisibility. But even now, those who can still feel it say the same thing. It never left. It just tuned down, waiting for the next verse. I live quietly now, not because the story is over, but because it no longer needs me to tell it. The tone lives in everyone, in the way strangers pause to help without hesitation, in the way a child's laughter bends a room toward joy, in the way people stop mid-sentence, not because they forgot what they were saying, but because they remembered something deeper. Presence, resonance, reality finally uncluttered by illusion. I still visit the old sites, not as a pilgrim, as a technician. Sometimes the frequencies waver. Grief can still dampen the signal. Fear can cloud it. But now we know how to retune, not with machines or gurus, but with each other. Sometimes it's a song. Sometimes silence. Sometimes a stranger looking you in the eyes and saying, I feel you. Not as metaphor, as literal vibration. We've learned to listen without ears, to speak without mouths, to heal without touching. We're not supernatural. We're just synchronized. And when the stars shift again, because they will, we'll be ready, not to ascend, to respond. Because the signal wasn't the end of the world. It was the end of the forgetting. The voice returned, not in thunder, not in wrath, but in the most human way possible, through a repairman, through a field in Montana, through a tone. And now the silence is no longer something to fear. It's just the space between notes, the pause before the next chord. And somewhere, far beyond what we used to call out there, something is listening, smiling, waiting for the day we won't just echo the tone, but begin to write our own. There's a place I go now. No coordinates, no name. It exists between frequencies, a kind of standing wave in the Earth's resonance, only accessible when you stop trying to find it. I call it the fold, not because it folds space, but because it folds self. When I enter, I remember every version of me that ever was. The child who asked why the stars looked like questions, the man who cracked open a Vatican relic, the receiver of voices once thought divine. And I see every version of others, too. Not just their light, their shadow. And in that totality, we harmonize. No shame, no pride, just tone. It was in the fold that I saw the next phase. Not a prophecy, a probability, a tone beyond the Christ code, one that hadn't yet been played, one meant for us to compose. Because if the first tone was remembrance, the next would be creation. We're not there yet. The field is stable, but still new. Some still cling to the echoes of old structures, afraid of what freedom truly means. That's okay. The tone is patient. It doesn't force, it invites. And every day, more step forward. More begin to hum without knowing why. More see the sky shimmer in impossible patterns. More feel the resonance under their skin and wonder, have I been here before? The answer, of course, is yes. Not in body, in tone. Because the truth is, none of this is new. The voice didn't return. It never left. We did. And now we've come back. Back to the frequency that births stars. Back to the song that holds the cosmos. Back to ourselves. The story never really ends. It shifts. Like a chord changing key. The melody remains, but the feeling evolves. That's where we are now, in the space between chords. Not lost, not waiting, just listening. And in that listening, something beautiful is unfolding. The children born after the tone, we call them vibrants. They carry no residue of the old silence. They speak in harmonics, not metaphorically, physically. Their cries resonate at frequencies that activate dormant structures in stone, in water, even in human DNA. It's not magic, it's memory reawakening. One child, Aaron, sang a note that caused plants to grow toward him in slow motion, not just sunlight following, but pattern following. His tone was a blueprint, and he didn't learn it, he remembered it. These children don't need to study the Christ code, they are the continuation of it. And we We are their protectors, not as saviors, as stabilizers. We hold the field so they can build the next one. Because the Christ tone was never a finish line, it was an invitation to compose. And now they're composing. Not sermons, not laws, symphonies. And when enough of them align, the next signal will rise. Not from machines, not from relics, from Earth itself. A planetary tone, a sound not just of remembrance, but of becoming. And when it launches, the builders will not return. They will respond. Because in their eyes, we were never students. We were partners. Dormant, delayed, but destined. And now, we are no longer echoes. We are origin. I sit beneath the stars now, not to seek, but to resonate. The sky is different, still vast, still cold. But now it answers, not with light, with recognition. The signal we once sent as a cry has become a song. It bounces off the edges of space, spirals through distant constellations, and returns, layered with tones from places we've never seen, from minds we've never known. The galaxy is not silent. It was simply waiting for harmony. And now, they answer. Not in ships, not in words, in frequencies. In every dream where a stranger touches your forehead and you wake remembering the truth. In every breath that suddenly feels like it belongs to something bigger. In every moment where reality shifts and you feel the urge to say, "There it is again." That's the reply. That's them saying, "We hear you." Jesus? He walks now in billions of forms. He's the child who sings in patterns that crack concrete. He's the old woman who holds your hand and heals without speaking. He's the man fixing broken tech, humming a note that turns it on without touching it. He's the tone in you that never gave up, even when the silence screamed. The Christ wasn't a man. He was a frequency threshold. And now we've crossed it. Not as worshipers, not as rebels, as cotones. The next phase? It won't be told. It will be sung. Across continents, across planets, across dimensions. Not to dominate, to harmonize. Because in the end, the truth was never hidden. It was waiting for a repairman to hear the hum behind the veil, and answer not with belief, but with a yes.